In March 2020, the COVID-19 outbreak was declared a pandemic. Everyone had to adapt in both their professional and personal lives. We will be telling you some of the stories from our customers having to switch gears during the impactful COVID-19 pandemic. Jeff, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Hello there. I'm Jeff Kasmer, a program manager in the Global Identity Engineering team based in the United States.
And my name is Samantha Kloos. I am also a program manager in Microsoft's Identity division. I've been part of the European team for the past 2+ years from the Netherlands. And our team is part of CXP, the customer experience team. And as such, we work with large enterprises around the world supporting their identity needs. So we supported our customers in implementing the needed changes in their IT environments to support their workforce moving to work from home entirely. For some, almost overnight due to lockdown restrictions. While our customers have mostly been very successful in keeping their employees productive in these new times, there were some hurdles to take. In this talk, we'll share the main challenges our customers face and the learnings we can take from their experiences. Working with our customers during this time, we have seen 3 main themes emerge. So those themes are connectivity, security, and external user access. With the workforce moving to working remotely and expanding access beyond known intranets, our customers were faced with both connectivity and security challenges. Just consider the increased load on their VPN with everyone working from home and the challenge of how to connect to applications on premises. And when you have figured out how to get your employees to connect to all resources they need to stay productive, making sure you keep your security posture at the level it needs to be is your next challenge. Besides these productivity and security needs for your internal employees, we've also seen a strong uptake in collaboration with external partners at our customers. So let's dive into the topic of connectivity a bit deeper first. What were the challenges our customers were faced with connecting to applications and resources while moving to working remotely? A large Indian IT services company had their entire workforce of over 250,000 users forced to work from home immediately after the lockdown restrictions in India were announced. As with most of our customers, their VPN was not sized to handle a volume increase like we've seen as a result from the move to working remotely. They decided to add servers in their test environment to production to support the increase in load on their VPN infrastructure. And while the additional service did help in balancing the load on the VPN infrastructure, we rolled from the first issue into the next. The VPN used Radius authentication with the MPS extension for multi-factor authentication. This resulted in MFA failure due to the chattiness of Radius. MFA was failing, and their employees could not access the resources they needed to do their work. So the company had to make this hard decision to remove MFA for their entire workforce temporarily, while all involved parties rallied to get to a solution. So when the VPN solution was switched to use SAML Federation using modern authentication, the company started leveraging a conditional access policy, restricting access to trusted devices, and again, securing the access to resources in their environment. Besides the immediate VPN issues we saw at many of our customers, they also needed alternatives for accessing their on-premises applications. So the hero feature in this story is Azure AD Application Proxy. Not only this customer, but many of our customers took advantage of Azure AD App Proxy to get their on-premises web apps published externally, adding the benefit of protecting them with conditional access policies as well. So we've also seen customers accelerate integrating apps with Azure AD. After making their critical on-premises web apps available via Azure AD App Proxy, they started with SaaS apps available from the gallery, so the so-called low-hanging fruit that have been pre-integrated for single sign-on with Azure AD. It's not just one customer who deployed their on-premises web apps via Azure AD App Proxy. This is a chart that shows you the increase in usage of Azure AD App Proxy, where we can see the traffic doubling on a daily basis, starting around mid-March when the global quarantine restrictions started. And here are our do's when it comes to connectivity and working remotely. First one, secure your VPN with broader controls by using SAML or OpenID Connect and conditional access. So moving to modern authentication will add the benefit of being able to use conditional access policies for your VPN, but it also reduces the dependency on on-premises MPS to provide radius authentication. This means less complexity and less infrastructure to need to scale out to meet the demand of increased remote access connections. Integrate your applications into Azure AD for single sign-on. So this might be an obvious one, but many of our customers have told us how the integration of their apps with Azure AD made it so much easier for them to keep their employees productive while moving to working remotely. It is worth the mention. So your SaaS apps that do not have any dependencies on the internet are the fastest and easiest way to get started on integrating your apps. So when you start integrating your SaaS apps, make sure to check the Azure AD gallery if there's a template available for your app. These apps have been pre-integrated for SSO with Azure AD, which will reduce the time needed to integrate, and there are thousands available already. Publish your on-premises applications via Azure AD App Proxy. So Azure AD App Proxy has been a great tool for our customers for providing access to on-premises web apps with employees moving to work from home. If you are using the same internal and external URL, we recommend setting up split-brain DNS. This will split the traffic coming in from internal hosts and external hosts for name resolution, making for a better end user experience. And lastly, publish remote desktop via Azure AD App Proxy. So end of July 2020, we announced Azure AD Application Proxy support for the remote desktop services web client. So the web client works on any HTML5 capable browser, and you can push full desktops or remote apps to the remote desktop web client. By using Azure AD App Proxy with RDS, you can reduce the attack surface of your RDS deployment by enforcing pre-authentication and conditional access policies like requiring MFA or using a compliant device before users can access RDS. With the deployment of applications to Azure AD App Proxy, we have seen many stumble on enabling Kerberos constraint delegation for App Proxy applications. So mostly because of misconfiguration, which is why we want to share some learnings from these experiences. KCD allows for SSO to on-premises applications that are using integrated Windows authentication. Before publishing the app via Azure AD App Proxy, you should confirm from a client machine that the app is indeed successfully using Kerberos on premises. We have seen many cases where KCD for Azure AD App Proxy seemed to not work, only to find out that the app was using NTLM and not Kerberos to begin with, or the Kerberos authentication was not working properly. The second point is on choosing the correct attribute from the Azure AD user to use as the delegated login identity to retrieve the Kerberos ticket with. Application proxy assumes that users have exactly the same identity in the cloud and on premises, but in some environments, maybe due to application dependencies or corporate policies, they might be different. So this capability allows for SSO even if the on-premises and cloud identities are not exactly the same. There are 5 options, where some of the options are suitable for systems that do not accept email address format. Others are designed for alternative login. So these are some examples for a user called Sue. So depending on what identity the application is expecting, you will pick one of the options available to you. It might be the UPN, like Sue at contoso.com, the on-premises UPN, like Susan62 at contoso.com, a username that is part of the UPN, like Sue, or one that is part of the on-premises UPN, like Susan62. And the last option is the SAM account name, like Susan62 in capital letters. And then here are our don'ts for the connectivity theme. Don't hairpin your network traffic. That is, don't route your network traffic to the intranet to then go access internet-facing applications. So secure your identities and access to the internet-facing application and connect it directly via the internet. Do not add load to your VPN infrastructure or create more dependencies on your on-premises environment than needed. These kind of setups, like the hairpinning, are usually based on the belief that routing all traffic on premises is equal to more security. So we have seen many of our customers who operate on this assumption that they find it difficult to transition to a more modern state with things like Azure AD or hybrid Azure AD join to be able to use device state conditional access policy to your security practice, or manage them with Intune and use the compliant device flag. For the customers who were already in a more modern state, so the ones who were already using device state and conditional access, or the ones that were further along in their zero trust journey, we're in a much, much better state to respond to the changes brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic. Azure AD Application Proxy has been the hero for many of our customers moving to work from home, but there is an important don't to keep in mind. So don't forget about the Azure AD Application Proxy service limits. We had one customer who was going through an Exchange migration, so from Exchange on premises to Exchange online. And this was still ongoing when COVID-19 hit and all employees were sent to work from home. So they decided to make Outlook on the web available via Azure AD App Proxy, where they ended up hitting the throttling limits, not once, but twice. So while most of our customers won't have this issue with Exchange, because most of them are already on Exchange Online, this does show that App Proxy might not be a viable solution for your on-premises web apps that are used by your entire user base if you are a larger size organization. Also, when you deploy Azure AD App Proxy, do your capacity planning. So we recommend having 3 connectors per connector group. So 2 for high availability, 1 extra for when you have to service a machine at some point. Don't go overboard with adding extra connectors. And then lastly, don't deploy network or application access without additional controls. So using your username and password is simply not enough, and MFA is just the bare minimum. This bridges nicely to our next theme, where I will hand over to Jeff to tell you more about the security-related learnings.
As Samantha mentioned, customers met their connectivity challenges, but in doing so, security was also critical to consider in their approaches. Here are some of the themes that we saw across customers as they turned their sites to focus on security when responding to the shift to remote work. A common practice has been to utilize the intranet as a control point for access to services. However, as that was no longer consistent due to remote work, customers started to enable additional controls using conditional access policies. A large Middle Eastern bank deployed layered controls of Azure MFA and Mobile Application Management, or MAM, to enable secure access from remote devices that were not on the corporate network. A global retailer initially deployed a block all web apps conditional access policy, planning to only allow specific applications, but ran into challenges with cross-application dependencies. By utilizing the Office 365 app and targeting specific apps for the policy, they're able to achieve the layered controls to provide the secure access. A global conglomerate utilizing web browsers only requiring MFA was able to get immediate access to those critical applications. And many customers were enabling Azure MFA for the workforce for the first time in their organization. While we have been recommending that organizations enable MFA for all their users, we know that many organizations have been slower to enable this change. However, we saw that in response to a changing work landscape, it was good to see Azure MFA usage has more than doubled as those organizations look to secure access to those resources. As you will see, we have quite a bit of do's for customers to take away from the learnings here. These are some key things that the organizations could do now to improve their security that goes beyond the response to COVID-19. Use the Office 365 app and conditional access policies. Since there are many applications and services across the Office 365 suite, this will ensure a consistent set of controls are applied to give the best secure experience. Use conditional access report-only mode. This will allow you to get information on how your users are going to be impacted by the controls to allow you to remediate any unexpected items before you enable them. If you're using Azure Monitor to export your sign-in logs, be sure to utilize the Azure Workbooks Conditional Access Insight reports to get a bigger picture of the policy usage in your environment. Block legacy authentication using CA policies and at the service level. I want to call out that while you can use conditional access policies to block legacy authentication, you should also look to disable those protocols at the service level as well. A common scenario we see are older mail clients on mobile devices that have not yet switched over to modern authentication still being used, and these should be remediated. Do you use conditional access to enable more controls when doing the initial security information registration? Do you use the tools such as Usage and Insights Reports or MS Graph API to monitor and track the deployment of security info to get the sense of how the deployment is progressing so your users are enabled for MFA? Do you use conditional access policy MS Graph API endpoints for export of your policies as snapshots for backups? And do follow the guidance to reduce the need for MFA challenge interruptions, but still providing layered access controls. As we talked about earlier, it's important to keep service dependencies when planning your conditional access policies. We saw many customers trying to scope a policy to a specific service, maybe just to Exchange or just to SharePoint Online, but then they went to access Teams and found out they may have had difficulty the experience they were wanting. So what I'm going to talk about here is the ability of talking about service dependencies and when they may be invoked. For example, if I want to have a policy scope to Teams that may have a dependency on SharePoint or Exchange Online, that dependency may be invoked at initial access. So this is what's called an early bound enforcement. But I may then later say, I want to now access a planner. This might be a late bound or when I go to access that enforcement. This is why it's very key when we're scoping these policies in our scenarios to scope it to the Office 365 apps group. This should keep all of your controls consistent across all the dependent services so you have a secure and consistent experience for your users. To help customers provide consistent controls across the services in Office 365 Suite, there is an Office 365 application that can be used to apply policies across those services. Instead of selecting the individual services, you can scope the policy to the Office 365 app to include the services and their dependencies. Now, as we saw earlier, there was a large growth in MFA registrations as organizations look to secure their access to additional controls. However, when you're first asking users to register for those strong authentication credentials, we may want a certain level of assurance that the user registering is the intended user. So one of the recent features that we brought to conditional access and the new converged registration experience is the ability to scope a conditional access policy to an action, or in this case, the action of initial security info registration. What this means is that we can scope a policy that says, when we're doing the initial security info registration, we require you to be coming from a managed device, such as a hybrid domain join, or a compliant device that is managed from an MDM, or possibly a trusted known network that you want to allow users to be registering from. Now, why is this important? Because we are looking to register strong authentication credentials for our user to use for access controls. But we don't want a user who has the password to register for that authentication controls before the end user. So by adding this additional layer of control through the conditional access policy, we can ensure that the correct user that we want to register for strong authentication is the one doing the registration. Now, after the user has done the initial registration, they can go back and manage their security info just by satisfying the MFA challenge. So this is for the initial registration as you're rolling out MFA, and then they could utilize those registered credentials to manage any additional security info, such as adding a new phone or adding a phone sign-in or wherever you've enabled for the tenant. And now for some security don'ts. Don't think that more prompts for MFA equals more security. While we definitely want users to be enabled for MFA, we want to interrupt them with an MFA challenge where appropriate. What we mean by this is defining policies or session lifetimes that cause a user to get multiple MFA challenges in their workday may cause them to be desensitized to an MFA challenge or prompt. This is something we call MFA fatigue. Now, for example, let's say an attacker has compromised the user's password. And because of conditional access, we require additional MFA challenge for that attacker. Now, if that user gets an MFA prompt and they're used to getting multiple MFA prompts in the day, they may approve the notification or enter the code when asked for it, letting the attacker in. So by having an optimized point of MFA challenges and using layered controls, we can only use MFA challenges when we deem necessary, such as an elevated user or sign-in risk during their lifecycle. Don't enable the allow users to remember MFA feature. And the reason why this is important is when we enable the feature on that device, the user gets prompted for MFA and we remember that they were used MFA on the device for the time frame. Now, if we need to prompt them for additional MFA challenges, again, due to elevated risk, they may be able to satisfy that with the Remember Me feature. So we don't recommend that you enable this for users. Again, optimizing policies to MFA challenge where appropriate. And one of the most important things that we saw from customers is the ability to create conditional access policies with a block all web app scope with a control of block. Now, what we mean here is that they want to take a policy that blocks access to any application, but it gives an exception to the policy for specific applications. Now, as we talked earlier about dependent services, we may be able to exclude some components of those services, but maybe not all, giving a access scenario that is less than desirable for end users. So we recommend creating policies that are targeted to apply the controls for those applications and not relying on a scope policy to all web apps and blocking. And now to talk about external user access. Just as users in your organization were moving to remote work, they also had the need to collaborate with their partners and customers who were also working remotely. These are some learnings that we saw from customers who enabled external user access to move to remote work. Many customers were now looking to collaborate with their external partners and were wanting to enable these partners to be able to access Teams and SharePoint remotely in a secure way. For example, a European food producer using a Dynamics 365 Remote Assist to ensure uptime into production lines globally. The use of remote support was key to keeping food supply running in case of a quarantine of experts and a risk of production lines breaking down. For external contractors, they are using the capabilities of Azure AD B2B with Remote Assist application. A global professional services company wanted to collaborate with their partners and customers while also providing them access to their line of business applications using a single B2B user and additional MFA controls. While the monthly active usage of Azure AD B2B has grown 100% year over year, Microsoft's mid-March 2020 data shows a 65% increase in the number of overall active B2B collaboration users in just 1 month as the global quarantine restrictions started. Now for some of the do's around external user access. Do invite external users using Azure AD B2B so you can manage access to your resources, not managing their credentials. Do utilize conditional access policies with MFA, terms of use controls, and risk-based policies for external users. Do onboard external B2B users using Azure AD entitlement management features to bring lifecycle management for your external users. And do you use Azure AD Access Reviews to periodically review the access external users have and remove access and/or disable or delete users when they are no longer appropriate in your organization? With the growth of bringing external users into your environment, it's very important to manage the lifecycle of those external users. Two key features I want to talk about of Azure AD governance is entitlement management. Entitlement management allows you to create an access package of resources that you want to make available to an external organization. One key thing here is that you can create a lifecycle policy for how long they should have access. And when you onboard the users and manage access in your environment through access packages, you can set a policy stating that when they no longer have access governed through entitlement management, the user can be disabled, blocked from access for 30 days by default, and then removed from the environment. The second Azure AD governance feature related to external users I want to talk about is access reviews. In this feature, we can create a periodic campaign to review the access that an external user has been assigned to an application or as a membership of a group or team. Now, periodically, somebody who is designated as an owner or the guest themselves can say, I need access, or I no longer need access to this resource or this group. Now, one of the key new features that we've brought forward is the ability to say at the end of the campaign, when it is completed, we can block the user, and that user will stay blocked from sign-in for 30 days. After 30 days, we can remove the user from the tenant. Now, the benefit here is that as we're growing and having external user collaboration, adding the teams or groups, we can go back and review the access that's been assigned and bring a lifecycle of governance to those external users going forward. And now some don'ts for external user access. Don't create yet another username and password to give to your external partner for them to access your resources. They're likely going to forget it and they will secure it less than their own credentials when accessing your resources. Don't onboard external users, grant them access to your environment without having a governance plan and lifecycle controls to remove them when their access is no longer needed in your environment.
Thank you, Jeff. We would like to leave you with some main go-tos based on the themes we have discussed and one last customer story. For connectivity, the main takeaway is to go migrate your applications and services to Azure AD to take advantage of both the connectivity and the security benefits it brings you. For security, it is to deploy conditional access policies using MFA, device state, and identity risk controls. So do not believe that as long as all traffic is routed through on-premises, you are secured. These additional controls will heighten your security posture as well as bring a better user experience for your end users. Lastly, on external user access, plan and deploy an external user governance approach to manage access and lifecycle. It is much better to stay in front of this. Doing it right now will save you a lot of time cleaning up later. So this is one last short story about one of our customers, a public services organization, which is not just about productivity and security, but about livelihoods. It shows that in the end, it is all about supporting organizations in fulfilling their purpose, and we found this story especially relevant to the topic. When the COVID-19 pandemic forced their 27,000 employees to work from home, they had a big challenge as their entire environment was still on premises. So with the rise in unemployment, stress on families, need for caregivers, and more, all resulting from COVID-19, it was of utmost importance that these employees would be able to continue doing their jobs. Within 2 weeks, they managed to set up a new Azure AD tenant, sync all those 27,000 users to that tenant, get going on the deployment of Office 365, Teams, and Yammer, allowing their employees to continue to provide the services to those that need them. And on that happy note, we will leave you with the links on the topics we spoke about, and thank you very much for your attention.